Today on Reading with Robin, we are speaking with Caleb Crain, who has written for The New Yorker, Harper's, The Paris Review, The Atlantic, The New York Review of Books, N+1, and The New York Times Book Review. He is the author of the novel Necessary Errors and the critical study American Sympathy. He was born in Texas, grew up in Massachusetts, and now lives in Brooklyn, New York, and we are so excited to be speaking with him today about his new novel, Overthrow. Welcome to Reading with Robin, Caleb.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Your book has now been out for a few weeks as we're speaking, and I am just obsessed with it. So I just want to get that, off my chest before we get started.
Okay.
It's really spectacular. Would you mind just giving a little bit of background about what Overthrow is about?
Sure. So it's about a group of young people who meet during the Occupy movement, and the sort of this political movement that happened in 2011, and some of them believe in this ideal of radical emotional transparency, which in some cases may or may not be coterminous with telepathy, and a few of them get excited and use what they think is this power to break into a computer that's being used by a government contractor who actually has them under surveillance. And then there's this big mess of journalistic coverage and legal trouble, and relationships get strained. And meanwhile, there are various love affairs that are happening within this circle of friends. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, no, I mean, you do tackle quite a bit in this book, and so because there are so many layers to it, I'm really curious kind of where the germ of the idea for that all came to be.
Yeah, the germ of it was I just had this picture in my head of this kind of melancholy grad student who was gay, who was maybe about 30, and, starting to feel not young, as one does when one is 30. I'm in my 50s, so I'm casting back to remember that. And he was just sort of melancholy. Pardon?
I'm 28, so
okay, all right. Well, so you have this ahead of you.
It hits close, but yes, continue.
Okay. Just sort of this fellow walking down a street at dusk in the fall and sort of looking in the windows and feeling kind of a little melancholy, a little autumnal. And I didn't know where it went, and I just knew that it was going to be a little bit of a sad story. That was the germ of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I think what you were saying before, too, just about this book, like it does have so many layers to it, and it's quite a meaty book. I'm just curious, like, you cover so many topics in the book, and there's a lot of really important parts to it, and so you've got kind of the social commentary and the politics end of it, but then really I think at the core too you have a book about relationships and friendships and romantic relationships as well, and I'm kind of wondering how you were able to balance all of that, because I think you did it really well, and everything kind of gets its it gets its moment in this book, but I'm just curious, like, from a structural standpoint, how you were able to finesse that.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad you see so much in it. I think I wanted to start with the character Matthew, he's the sort of melancholy grad student who's a little bit skeptical, and he sort of meets this sort of group of younger activists, radicals, and he's not immediately sure what he believes, how much he believes of their enthusiasms. He's not really sure that he's as utopian as they are. And I thought that would be an easier way for a reader to come into it rather than sort of being plunged into the sort of fervor of it. I don't know how, and at some point I got the idea of like sort of having this face-off between what you might call amateur telepathy and what you might call professional, technologically facilitated telepathy that happens every time we go on the internet. But yeah, but I was sort of drawing on these different rhetorics and different ways of talking about the world. That some of them are law, some of them are technology, some of them are cyber, some of them are more romantic ideas. The Matthew character is a grad student in poetry, so you also get some ideas, some thoughts about, and the fellow he falls in love with is a poet. So poetry and literature are actually part of it too. So yeah, it's a big mess a little bit. My husband and I were talking about it the other night, and we were like, yeah, it's not the kind of book you can sort of explain in 6 words.
No, but that's a good thing. That's
okay, really I'm glad you think it's a good thing.
I do, because I think it's such a multidimensional book, because that's how our lives are, and so I think, I was just really like blown away from an artistic and a stylistic standpoint that you were really able to do what you did. But it's funny because you mentioned utopias, and this is very off topic, but have you heard the podcast Nice Try? Have you heard of that one yet?
I have heard of it, and I want to listen to it, but I haven't actually been able to yet.
Yeah, I know. I'm not to like totally put you on the spot, but no, it's just when because you mentioned utopias, and I think that this book deals with that in large part, and that podcast, it's all about failed utopias.
Yeah,
I think it will give you a chuckle, and
a friend of mine named Chris Jennings wrote a book about utopias a few years ago that was really great, about sort of 19th century utopias. Most of them, I think they all fail. Yeah.
That is the sense that I get. I'll have to look for that one. And so I guess another one of my questions that's definitely, because we don't do spoilers here.
Okay.
So, yeah, because we really want people to get the book and read it and kind of look for things themselves. So most of my questions that I still have to ask you don't really have much to do with, well, some of them have something to do with the book. But I am curious. So, the book is set in 2011 around the Occupy movement in a city that kind of is reminiscent of New York, but it's not, explicitly, called New York. And, here we are 8 or so years later, and it all still feels very relevant, obviously. But I'm curious, like, what you might feel are some lessons that people can apply, even though this is a book that's, set in the near past. How is it relevant today?
Yeah. I mean, when I was writing it, my first book was actually set in like 1990, and I wrote it, 12 years ago, and so I was like, that past was settled, and I sort of felt safe writing about it. But when I was writing this one, I started writing this in 2012, so the sort of Occupy had just happened, and privacy and the Internet was very much in the air, but I was actually terrified the whole time. It took me 5 years to write, another year to edit. I was terrified the whole time that, like, it's possible that America will just move on from these issues, that people will be like, well, we thought about privacy and the Internet, and we were worried about that for a while, but, we've moved on. So that turned out to be something I didn't have to worry about. but I did not know that while I was writing the book. I was sort of scared all the way. I think that what I hope people can take away is it's a book about how things used to feel so promising and optimistic, and how all utopian political impulses and reform impulses begin with this incredible optimism. That is how change happens, but then institutions kettle and contain and frustrate, and things come into stress, and the people change, and people have breakdowns, and people, fall out of love with the people who sort of initially got them involved in these movements, and I guess I was hoping that if I put it in a story, it would help people understand sort of that this is just what happens, and maybe not to lose contact with that initial impulse just because we're now in a moment that's much darker. That doesn't mean that initial impulse wasn't real and doesn't have value. So. Oh. Yeah.
Well. No, thank you. It's interesting that you talk about kind of a past being settled, and with your first book, and with this, it's still a little bit, it's not so past, and I don't know how settled how settled we really are, but Yes, for sure. So, all right, on to the questions that are not totally related, but this first one is, I promise.
Okay.
Yeah, I promise. Nothing weird, nothing super weird. But early on in the book, tarot cards enter into the equation. And so my question is, do you read tarot cards? Have you ever read tarot cards? Like, what is you write about them quite well, so I'm just curious what your experience, what your level of experience or interaction is with tarot.
Sure. Well, I don't really know anything about tarot cards, and so I kind of loaned my ignorance to the characters, and they're using the cards as props for psychology experiments with each other. But I kind of loaned them my ignorance, and they're not using them in an expert way. I have a deck that I bought when I was 12, and I used it when I was writing the scenes. Whenever there's a scene and somebody lays out cards, I dealt the cards myself and then wrote around whatever cards came up.
Cool.
So I respected the process that much, but I can't claim to any authentic.
It's not going to be a side gig.
Sadly, I don't think I have any aptitude for that.
No, like pop up in Prospect Park. Well, we can hope.
Okay.
Well, and so you've had this deck since you were 12. That just blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, when I was 12, I went and stayed with a family in France as one of these sort of student exchange things, and they played. It was the south of France, and they played a game that was sort of like hearts with the tarot deck. And so it was something I did with that family, and I really enjoyed it, and so I bought a deck thinking that I would come home and play it with my friends, but nobody ever did. But I still have the deck. So I guess it has some talismanic meaning for me, but yeah.
Very cool. I've never heard of that game, but I'm headed to the south of France, so maybe I'll...
Okay, yeah. Ask around.
Maybe I'll find someone who... Yeah, I will. So, have you heard of this game? It's kind of like hearts. Don't really know what to call it, but it plays with the tarot deck. Yeah. And that's so interesting. Okay. So the next question that I have for you is about your Instagram.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so no, because I like to do a decent amount of sleuthing before we have guests on the show, just so that you can get kind of that like off the page sense about them, and this is not a bad thing, but you're on Twitter.
Okay. Guilty.
Where people can find you. Yep. And then I went on Instagram, and I'm like, this is really interesting. So you're relatively new to the platform, but I love what you're doing. And
thank you.
I'm obsessed with your dog.
Okay.
I don't know what their name is.
Toby. His name is Toby.
Toby. Well, he's a doll. And then you post a lot of pictures of like things in nature. And it's really funny because some of them, like, you'll write captions, and this must be really weird. Like, I'm reading back to you what your Instagram is about. But it's so funny because, like, I don't know what half of them are, but at this point I feel like I could identify them if I were in nature, but exclusively as things that I know that I've seen you post about.
Okay.
So I'm just curious, like, so are you like foraging in the park, or are these just like things that
I walked. Toby needs a lot of walking, so we go on a walk every morning at 7, and he's 11 years old, so we've been doing this for a long time. But I just always see interesting things, and I don't know, a couple months ago I thought, well, maybe I'll just bring my camera every day and see if I can photograph things. And then once you start photographing them, you think, well, I can't photograph that weed. I photographed that weed yesterday. I have to photograph the bugs today. And then you start to be like, well, I really want to get a dragonfly, but they move so fast. And so then I guess I get a little aggressive about, like, I'm going to get this dragonfly. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't get very many of them, and now they seem to have mostly migrated. I guess dragonflies migrate.
Maybe that's a topic for the next book. You never know.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, it's just, I like when people have like a very specific thing on their Instagram that they really, that catches their attention. With someone who I used to follow, like, they had a really weird inside joke with themselves that was running through their Instagram that, like, just was weird to anyone else. And I remember asking them about it, and they were like, oh, yeah, it's just, like, I forget what it was, but it was, like, things on floors. I don't know. It was really weird. And I wonder if Caleb's thing. It's like, is he eating these berries? I don't know.
No. Some of these berries are poisonous. Don't eat them unless you know what you're doing. Yeah.
I don't. I had friends that foraged in college. I went to school in Western Massachusetts, and and like they would eat some things. I didn't ever really eat things because I just didn't really trust them. We were 18.
Yeah, there's some dangerous weeds out there if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. Yeah,
these were kids that were like trying to be paleo. But like and really like I don't. It was a weird time. But yeah, so but thank you. I feel like I've definitely learned something from your Instagram handle. And
a lot of times when I post a label on the photo, it's because I just looked it up that morning after I took the picture and found it. So it's me sort of like, okay, this is what it is. Now remember it next time.
And don't let the dog eat it either. Well, he's just like, I can't believe he's 11. He looks very like spry and puppy-like. I could just talk about dogs forever. We're crazy dog people here.
Sure, yeah, I'm game. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
he's 11. He's kind of he's very sweet, and when he was a puppy, he needed lots and lots of walking because he just had so much energy. So, and we're still in the habit of long walks, and I think that keeps him young.
Yeah, he just looks so happy.
He smiles. It's sort of uncanny. Yeah.
He does. Yeah, he's got like a real humany smile. We have a 2-year-old cardigan Welsh Corgi, and he also has like he's interesting looking. But he also has like a very human-like smile. So when I saw Toby, I'm like, oh, that's cause not a lot of dogs don't smile. So I recognized that in him. I was like, he looks like a sweet dog because he's smiling.
He does, and he's very social, and he goes up to people in the park. They're just sitting on the bench, and he just goes up to them and demands love. So I do feel actually that Toby is the celebrity in the family, and that I just trail after him.
Yeah, you're just his person.
Yeah.
You're his posse. Yeah, and so does he hang out with you when you write? Like, what? I just picture, like, you guys having a really good time together.
He does sometimes come to my office, but, like most dogs, he sleeps mostly during the day.
One final question is just, one thing that our listeners love to hear is, like, what are you currently reading? What have you read lately, or something that you're, that's coming out that you're really excited about?
I just read this memoir called Uncanny Valley by Anna Wiener, who's actually going to interview me in San Francisco in 2 days.
Oh, cool.
And it's coming out in January from Farrar Straus, and it's about, she worked in in Silicon Valley, and it's just kind of almost a social history of the last few years in Silicon Valley by this very acute, gimlet-eyed observer who sort of, and it's kind of totally fascinating. It's kind of, fly-on-the-walls view of what's going on, what it's like to be inside that culture.
Very cool. Yeah, that one actually, it's funny, as you were saying it, that book just arrived at our house last week.
Oh, okay.
Because I remember the cover. So I will, since it has your blessing, I'll bump that up.
I would totally read that. And I just started, last night my friend Ben Mosier has a new biography of Susan Sontag. And that's like It's a big door stopper, but I just read 50 pages of it last night, and it's fascinating. I mean, I was fascinated by her, so very curious to hear what went on behind the icon.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And any book that's described as a door stopper is, that makes me excited. So
okay, good.
I like big books, but I also like really like sparse books too. Something really kind of cuts, but definitely something that's big and meaty. I'm always most of the time, 9 out of 10 times, I'm a fan.
Okay.
So, well, thank you so much for talking with us this afternoon. And, so we mentioned that you're on Instagram, you're on Twitter. Are those the two best places for people to find you if they want to follow you, or?
Yeah, sure. I also have a blog called Steamboats Are Ruining Everything.
Fantastic. Well, then people should find you there, too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today. And everyone, go pick up a copy of Overthrow by Caleb Crain and let us know what you think. And Caleb, it was such a pleasure chatting with you.
Yes, great talking to you. Thanks so much.